My teacher, Maizumi Roshi, used to always say to appreciate yourself, to appreciate yourself. Like that's the title of a collection of some of his teachings is appreciate yourself. So I want to talk a little bit about that today. And I want to talk about this attitude of appreciation that arises not only in relationship to our practice, but also in our life in general as we continue to practice. So there's only one thing that will bring you into the transformation that you may be seeking in this practice. And that's the willingness to abide where you are. But to abide where you are differently, where you are. By that I mean that transformation does not require you change the circumstances of your life. It merely requires you change your attitude toward them. Ultimately, to truly awaken completely requires the dismantling of the very subtle, deeply embedded patterns of perception that we carried since birth and that we developed in this life. The slate needs to be wiped clean so that all that remains is the reality of life, with no filament or trace of our egoic consciousness. That's not an easy thing to do. But the only effort it requires is to manifest as unconditional love for yourself primarily, and then to extend it to others. It's a deep commitment to stay present to that love in all conditions and all circumstances. One who is truly committed to awakening does not flee uncomfortable situations until all of the wisdom that can be extracted from that situation has been extracted. Here's a quote from the Gnostic Gospels, which were discovered in the Middle East in the last century. And this is a quote from Jesus. And he said, "If you do not bring forth what is within you, what is within you will destroy you. If you bring forth what is within you, what is within you will save you." So that means to approach every situation in life with an openness that allows whatever we're hiding in our shadow to come forward so that it can save us. But if we look at events in our life, they're neutral. I mean, we try to make everything personal. You all know the story about Job in the Bible. And apparently, according to the Bible, he was a pawn in the hands of God and the devil. So the devil said, yeah, it's just because he's wealthy and has a comfortable life, he's pious, but if you took all that away from him, what would happen? But things happen, you know. We say shit happens, but it's all neutral because it's impersonal. That's the problem when we start taking it personally. So the process of awakening is a process where you dissolve the value you put on certain ideas and perceptions of what life is and what life is for. It's only when we hold on tight that we suffer. And the Eightfold Path is taught by the Buddha as the path to liberation. Practically all of the 8 elements refer to the kind of attitude we should take relating to our actions, thoughts, speech, meditation, livelihood. And the more we reflect on it, all kinds of apparent paradoxes arise. But they're only paradoxes because we don't have right understanding. They're only paradoxes from the point of view of the so-called small or egoic mind, which we call the habit-ridden consciousness. Everything we view from this mind seems to be paradoxical or can be confusing because we're always adding an extra element or elements to our perception. It's always trying to fit things into particular patterns that we have in mind. So the Eightfold Path includes right understanding or right view, seeing things clearly as they are. And I'll talk more about that. And there's right thought or right intention. I remember former President Jimmy Carter making a statement, that he had impure thoughts and that he was going to work more on it. But, impure thoughts, they lead to impure speech and leads to impure actions, whatever impure means. But then right speech, those are the other two, right speech and right action. But it starts with thoughts. And then right livelihood. What is right livelihood? You think of right livelihood as something that does not cause harm. It would be great if we all had jobs that allowed us to constantly manifest unconditional love. But what prevents us from doing it? I've told the story before, and it's when I was meditating in London with Zen Master Sochu Suzuki, who was my first teacher. There was a young man in our Sangha, and in England, it's possible to get on the dole, in order for the government to pay you, although you're supposed to try to get work. And this young man had worked as a butcher, and he was offered a job as a butcher, but he preferred to take the dole rather than work. So he went to Sochu Roshi, and he said, I shouldn't work as a butcher. He said, it's really bad karma, isn't it? and he was trying to get his Zen master to say that, I don't know, conscientious objector or something like that. So, and I remember Soichi spoke very, very poor English, and he said, "Oh, chop, chop, chop. Very nice, very nice. Chop, chop, chop." So what is right livelihood? Yeah, I think any sincere Buddhist, wouldn't want to do certain kinds of jobs because obviously they cause harm to others and to animals. But Soichi Roshi was trying to teach this boy just to be mindful and attentive and to work and take his place. My grandfather was a butcher. He was a kosher butcher. This is a shechet, which requires a lot of skill, to prepare kosher meat. So I have that karma in my family. So there's right livelihood. And again, it's our attitude that is important, how we approach it, what we do. And then right effort, which we've talked about. I'll talk some more. Right mindfulness, which I've talked about. And right concentration, which is what we're perfecting this week. So our mind always wants to put things in neat boxes. And we have a truth, there is no self. Okay, so we make that fixed. No self, right? Got that. And then that becomes something to hold on to. So when we try to categorize Buddhist truth, it always comes back to one truth. We can express it in many different ways, and they all contain each other. The world is as it is. Now, does that add any knowledge? Saying the world is as it is? Now we want to break it down and categorize it. All things are complete as they are. It's another expression. Everything does not have a deficiency, nor does it have anything superfluous. It's complete. And everything's impermanent. And there's no such thing as the self. And we all have the marvelous capacity to realize our Buddha nature. See, all of these are teachings of the Buddha. And we can understand them on one level, but our practice is to understand them in our body, experientially. See, when the Buddha says everyone has a wisdom and virtue of the Buddha, and that includes everyone sitting here, everyone at home, and everyone outside in the community. But that's true in one sense, but it's not true in another until we experience it for ourselves. It's like, how can you explain that a lemon is sour to somebody who's never tasted it? That's why the Buddha didn't want to say much about enlightenment, because you get all kinds of ideas, and the ideas get in the way. But in the actual practice, we run up against all kinds of ambiguous situations. In his book, Roshi said, if you're trying to attain enlightenment, you're wasting your time on the cushion. Okay? So then what are we doing now? But look at this quote. It's from Bodhidharma. He says, the incomparable, marvelous way of all the Buddhas is attained only by long diligence in a practice difficult to practice and by long endurance of that difficult to endure. Now, Suzuki Roshi is saying if you want to attain something, you're wasting your time. Bodhidharma is saying that the incomparable, marvelous way of all the Buddhas is only attained by long, diligent practice. So what kind of an attitude are we supposed to have? I mean, these guys, are they just jerking us around? What's going on? Are we supposed to try? Are we not supposed to try? Supposed to make an effort? Are we not supposed to make an effort? Of course, if we have a fixed idea of what enlightenment is before we start, that's almost guaranteed to not work. Because then we miss what's right in front of us. You might ask, if I don't make an effort in the right direction, how can I reveal or realize who I am? So the word direction is key. Make an effort in the right direction. So, there's was a slogan years ago that said, if I don't change my direction that I'm headed, I'm going to end up exactly where I'm going. Where is that? And how can we have direction without a goal? Well, years ago, one of my students jokingly told me that as a child, he was very interested in Zen because whenever anybody asked him what he was interested in, he said nothing. That's direction without a goal. But goals can separate us from the moment, especially fixed goals, because we have all kinds of ideas, what we want, what we think is appropriate, how we think things should be run, how other people should behave, how we should behave. And if our mind is constantly there, we're missing our life in this moment. We're not bearing witness to our life and the life of others. We're just projecting our ideas, and we are not manifesting as unconditional love. But when we get down to it, what do we really know? How do we know what anything is? I mean, at a very basic level. Do we know what thought is? Do we know what speech is? Do we know what the body is? Do we understand? So when we sit, the boundaries of the body can dissolve. We become very spacious. So what is the body without our predetermined ideas about it? Appearing in a speck of dust and appearing in vast space. A friend of mine who's a very well-known physicist. And physicists study matter. right? An energy. So he said that the question for him isn't, how all of these objects and energies interact, but how do they even exist in the first place? So that question comes up a lot, actually, in Zen. In the Book of Equanimity, a monk said, if the original state is clean and pure, then why suddenly do mountains, rivers, and the great earth arise? Where do things come from? We say that form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. We chant that in the Heart Sutra. If everything is empty, where does it come from? So, you've been sitting for 5 days, so the question is, how quiet is your mind? So we can ponder all these things, but where will it get us? It reminds me of one of the first koans that Master Dogen struggled with. He said to himself, if it's true that each of us, without exception, has a wisdom and virtue of the Buddha, why did all the Buddhas and patriarchs have to practice continuously and with great effort in order to realize it? So we would all say, probably without exception, that this practice is difficult because our mind is so active and it's hard to tame it, hard to discipline it. We have so many things that capture our attention. Now, let me give you an analogy. Suppose you were walking down the street in Boulder and you had 1,000 $1 bills in your pocket or your pocketbook. And it was a windy day and you bumped into somebody and they fell out and scattered all over the place. So naturally, you'd go around chasing after them and try to capture as many of them as you could. Maybe even some good Samaritans would grab some and give them back to you, or maybe some wouldn't. But at that moment, do you even think difficult or effort? Does that even cross your mind as you're trying to pick up all of these bills scattered around by the wind? You just do it. Now, I ask you, is your marvelous true nature as valuable as 1,000 $1 bills? So what kind of effortless effort will we make to realize it? And how can we genuinely give true expression to our lives? I mentioned earlier, and a few of our senior students whose talks I appreciated also mentioned it, that when we talk about our practice, there's 3 essential elements, which are diligence or determination, faith, and a great questioning. So what does it mean to be diligent in our practice? I think it was Suzuki Roshi who also said if you're trying to attain enlightenment, you're wasting your time. He also said that making right effort means to get rid of whatever is extra. So if each one of us looks at what are we carrying around that we don't need? It's not just material things we're talking about, it's our attitudes, our projections, our judgments, how we're protecting ourselves. I remember somebody once asked my Zumi Roshi, what's the purpose of Zen? And he said something that just startled me. He said, it's to be stupid. To be stupid. To be foolish. How many of us are willing to be foolish? It means being willing to fail, to be willing to make mistakes. So when you come to Doksan with me, or this retreat with Tetsudo Sensei, or with Roshi Shinko, don't worry about putting on an appearance. Just be genuine. Be totally open to whatever the situation presents. We're not interested in impressions. We want to see the real you. Be willing to say something stupid. There's a wonderful story about a monk who was very simple and overheard some other monks talking about enlightenment, and he very much wanted to get in on their secret. And so they were just joking around with him, and they said the first thing he had to do was give them something. So I think they said, the first thing you have to do is prepare a meal for us, and then we'll tell you. And then after the meal, they told him to sit in one corner of the room, and they bounced a ball off his head. And they said, now you've achieved the first stage of arhatship. An arhat is an enlightened person. And then they put him in another corner and bounced a ball off his head. And now you've received the second stage. And they did this in all four corners. And by the time they got to the fourth corner, he had experienced wonderful enlightenment. Just because of that sincerity, that innocence and openness. He was willing to be vulnerable and stupid and simple, willing to fail. Of course, the other monks were astounded because they hadn't achieved what he achieved. And they were just having fun with teasing him. What about children? Talk about diligence when they learn to walk. If they had any awareness of what it meant to fail, they would never learn. Constantly falling down. Sometimes they fall down and hit themselves hard on the floor or on an object like a table or a door. They cry for a while, then they get up and do it again. Wonderful lesson. They don't give up. And that's what Master Dogen said. The 1,000 failures become the one success. 1,000 failures. Wow. He also said that without the deep cold that penetrates to the bone, the plum blossoms could not bloom in the spring. So without these failures, there's no success. Reminds me of a quote by Einstein, who said that in order to be successful, a scientist has to be willing to grope in the dark for many years, being foiled at every turn, just being willing to do that. Of course, success and failure is a funny way. to talk about our practice. But as Suzuki Roshi said, if you're trying to attain something right there, your practice has gone off course. But first, when we first start practicing, we need some kind of motivation. We need something to bring us some joy or pleasure in the practice. As I mentioned a few days ago, I just had a few moments of clarity where my mind would quiet down. That was enough to keep coming back. In this session, some of you have talked about how joyful it is, the practice. When we get past, all of the resistance. So diligence is important, and the faith is another element of our practice. We can also say confidence as well as faith. But once we have confidence in our practice, or we have belief in our true nature, then we put all of our energies into revealing it. And it's most important to have faith in oneself. Faith that we are the Buddha. In some centers, there's competition to please the teacher. The important part is faith in oneself without receiving any kind of acknowledgement or acclaim. It's hard to do. But in relating to this, Krishnamurti said, real learning comes about when the competitive spirit has ceased. He said the competitive spirit is merely an addictive process that is not learning at all. This is not only true of competition with others, but competition with yourself as well. So where do we lose this faith in ourselves? And that's what competition means, that we think there isn't enough to go around. Somehow if we don't get our share, we're missing out. We're coming from a position of scarcity. That's the thing about our practice and about the openness and the love and compassion that come from it. There's no limit. There's no lack. So a monk asked Joshu, what is Joshu? Master Joshu we've talked about from time to time, and I think it was Akaju who said that he started teaching when he was 80, but he became a monk when he was a teenager. He was with Nansen for many years, and then he pilgrimaged. And he lived to be 120, so he taught for 40 years. And he settled in a town called Joshu, and it was a walled town. And so this monk said, what is Joshu? And Joshu said, East Gate, West Gate, North Gate, South Gate. And all of the gates, the 4 gates of the town. We all have all of these gates, all of these openings. And what are they? They're opportunities in the east, west, north, and south. Opportunities for what? Opportunities to see who we really are, what our life is, if we just maintain this diligence and this faith. As I mentioned, the third essential is sometimes translated as great doubt or great questioning, but I was never satisfied with these translations. So instead, I don't want to think of it as skepticism, but it means really wanting to know, not having any hesitancy, really wanting to jump in, really being consumed by the question, like a baby learning to walk. Don't be afraid to be afraid. Don't be afraid of fear. That's a nice analogy for this questing or questioning. Yeah. When you know something's really there, you'll keep looking for it. Like I mentioned, you misplacing your car keys. What about our true nature? So what we need to do is just quiet our mind. So bring us back to the original question, what are we trying to attain? And if we already have it, why are we trying to attain it? As I mentioned, that's a question that Dogen struggled with for years. For as Zen students, all of our troubles, our problems, our difficulties, our barriers, our upsets, they're wonderful treasures if we utilize them right, if we have the right attitude, if we know how to be satisfied. In Tenzo Kyokan, which is instructions to the cook, Master Dogen said, the many rivers which flow into the ocean become the one taste of the ocean. When they flow into the pure ocean of the Dharma, there's no distinction as delicacies or plain food. There's just one taste, and it is the Buddha Dharma, the world as it is. All of the rivers flow into the ocean and become the one taste of the ocean. When they flow into the pure ocean of the Dharma, there's no such distinction as delicacies or plain food. There is just one taste, and it is Buddha Dharma, the world itself as it is. Making the effortless effort, that's the one taste of the Buddha Dharma. Having great desire for enlightenment, one taste of the Buddha Dharma. Having great faith in our essential nature, that's a one taste of the Buddha Dharma. So whatever comes up, whatever it is, just take it as that. So one thing we know for sure, that each moment follows upon each moment. Whatever this moment brings, that's this moment. And then there's this moment. And if this moment is effortless effort, that's the world itself as it is. If this moment is effortful effort, that's the world as it is. So how do we maintain the right attitude towards this practice? Just get rid of whatever is extra. A man comes to a Zen teacher and says, will you write down for me some principles of the highest wisdom? And the teacher immediately picks up a brush and writes attention. Is that all? The man said. Won't you add something more? And the teacher writes, attention, attention. And the man is getting frustrated. Irritated, he says, I don't see anything profound in what you've written. Picking up the brush a third time, the teacher writes, attention, attention, attention. After a while, the man says, what does attention mean anyway? And the teacher replies, attention means attention. Can you be attentive without judgments? Can you be attentive without prejudice? Can you be attentive without fear? Can you be attentive without opinions? Can you be attentive without ideas? Can you be attentive without goals? When you are completely absorbed in your zazen, where are you at that moment? Where are your thoughts? Where are your fears? Where are your goals? What remains? Pure awareness without a trace of preference. So, sit well, carry that mind forward. We're getting into the very best part of Sesshin. So, as one of my Dharma sisters always says, don't wobble. Just be steady. Do your best.